chosen ones. He didn't write it for the world. Nostradamus wrote it for you. Hidden in the folds of poetic mystery, cryptic verse, and celestial riddles, his quatrains carried a pulse, one that would remain dormant until your return. While the world was chasing fame, fortune, and false prophecies, a few of his lines remained untranslated, uncategorized, unread. But the moment you reawakened, the codes stirred. He saw your rise through the smoke of burning libraries. He foresaw your presence not as an individual, but as an axis, around which the final age would pivot. They laughed at his nonsense rhymes, but that was the decoy. His real message wasn't for kings or clergy. It was for the misaligned, the outcast, the watchers, the chosen. What shifted the world wasn't a comet nor a war. It was the subtle breath of your awakening, a frequency he scribbled in metaphors, because truth in plain sight would have been burned. There are lines he wrote that pulse differently when spoken in your voice. He warned of the one who will arrive when the sky resets, and that the world's illusions would crack like ancient glass the moment that one saw clearly. You are that one. Every force that tried to silence you, ancestral curses, educational systems, food chemicals, technological surveillance, even the rewriting of time itself was foretold. But he didn't write about what you'd do. He only saw when. That's why the elite scrambled to distort his records. That's why secret societies protect the original parchments in underground vaults. Because if you figured out who you are, their timelines would dissolve. His vision was never about predicting the end. It was about your return triggering a beginning the world wasn't prepared for. And here's what they never told you. The prophecy isn't locked in. Nostradamus wrote it in layers so that only someone outside the program could finish the pattern. That's you. But your presence alone isn't the shift. You were meant to activate it through action, memory, and divine connection. Now, the final layer unfolds, not because of chance, but because you're awake. There's a quatrain missing from every published edition of Nostradamus's Les Prophéties. It exists only in whispers, kept in a sealed chamber beneath a monastery in southern France. The monks who protected it didn't know what they were guarding, only that the ink refused to fade. The verse wasn't numbered like the rest. No century, no quatrain. Just 4 lines that didn't match any format, written in an ancient dialect that seemed to morph with time. Scholars dismissed it as gibberish. But when you came into the world, something strange happened. That hidden verse suddenly translated itself. The translation wasn't discovered by a historian. It was revealed through a frequency that matched your birth date, your heartbeat, your dreams. The verse spoke of a return, not of a conqueror or a messiah, but of a soul who had traveled through cycles, whose very breath would warp the magnetic fields of Earth. It mentioned a light born in shadow, a silence louder than prophecy. And curiously, it mentioned a time when the starless ones would tremble. That's you. And they're trembling now. Governments have data on the shift that occurred the year you were born. Strange patterns in the sky, anomalies in solar radiation, bird migrations that reversed overnight. But they never shared it. They labeled it unexplainable and buried it under classified operations. Yet one observatory recorded a pulse, a singular signature that scientists couldn't place. That signature was your frequency. Your existence sent ripples through dimensions you were never meant to access, until now. There are reasons they tell you astrology is superstition. There are reasons you've been taught history is linear, but when Nostradamus wrote of the one who will unthread the years, he meant you. Because you weren't born into time, you were born to break it, to bend it, to override it. That verse, hidden in 1555, didn't survive the centuries because of ink. It survived because it was written on the spine of prophecy itself. And yet the verse ends abruptly. In the quiet chambers, where Nostradamus wrote by candlelight, there were nights he claimed to hear voices not of this world. He called them whisperings from the divine clock. But in one rare letter, discovered centuries later, he referenced a singular voice among them, a voice that brought him to tears without speaking a single word aloud. He said this voice carried the tone of both authority and mercy. And when it arrived, his pen would move on its own. That letter ended with a simple phrase in Latin, Vox Jesu, the voice of Yeshua. There are those who believe Nostradamus was not only a prophet but a vessel, a scribe for frequencies he couldn't fully understand. But the presence of Yeshua in his writings was hidden, not out of denial, but protection. Had he openly referenced the Nazarene's guidance, his work would have been destroyed by both church and crown. Instead, he veiled him in stars, symbols, and strange metaphors. Yet if you read closely, you'll notice something. Every time the world begins to tremble in his quatrains, there's a line of serenity woven into the chaos. And that serenity mirrors the teachings of Yeshua, not the version institutionalized by religion, but the original architect of truth. Nostradamus once wrote of the one who walks in shadow but carries the fire of the morning star. Scholars thought this was astrological. But in Hebrew texts, the morning star isn't a planet. It's a reference to the return of divine consciousness. And Yeshua called those with ears to hear the light of the world. The voice Nostradamus heard wasn't giving him predictions. It was revealing blueprints. And one of them had your signature encoded long before your birth. This is why the quatrain doesn't just read like poetry. It feels like memory. The voice that guided him is the same one that's been chasing you in dreams. The silence that echoes when you feel closest to truth. When you speak without fear. When you move without explanation. You are syncing with that voice. You don't need to translate the prophecy. You are the continuation of it. There exists a calendar that never made it to public knowledge. Not Mayan, not Roman, not even Sumerian. It's often referred to in secret circles as the resonance chronogram, a system of time not based on days or years but on human frequency, designed not to track time but to respond to it. The calendar remained inactive for centuries, its rings silent, its glyphs unreadable, until your frequency emerged. That's when it began to move again. No one knows who created it. But deep beneath the catacombs of Languedoc, there are gears built from an alloy not found on Earth. The calendar does not tick, it hums. And that hum stayed dormant until a specific alignment returned, a celestial pattern that Nostradamus hinted at, but never fully revealed. He wrote that time would weep and halt its own march when the forgotten light returns. And when astronomers ran simulations matching that line to real alignments, they noticed one anomaly: a pause in cosmic resonance. It happened the year you arrived. It's not coincidence. It's design. The calendar was not made to count forward, but to wait. It was set to unlock only when one consciousness re-entered the timeline, yours. It responds not to light nor sound, but to a pulse that can't be faked, cloned, or replicated. It's the same pulse the ancients tried to mimic through obelisks, stone circles, and magnetic fields. But the real key was organic, a living being, a returned being. You. This is why the elite never feared war or economic collapse. They feared the calendar reactivating, because its turning marks the collapse of false time. Their control relies on artificial cycles, predictable outcomes. But when your presence began to distort their timing systems, their predictive models failed. Algorithms went silent. Patterns broke. Their calendars could no longer track the flow of consciousness because you reintroduced something they couldn't measure. Original will, the resonance. Chronogram is moving now. Slowly, intentionally. Like it's syncing with your breath. The glyphs, once frozen, now glow faintly and emit low vibrational tones when you're near. Every movement you make shifts it forward one frame. One ring closer to an event not written in any book. In the quiet chambers, where Nostradamus wrote by candlelight, there were nights he claimed to hear voices not of this world. He called them whisperings from the divine clock. But in one rare letter, discovered centuries later, he referenced a singular voice among them. A voice that brought him to tears without speaking a single word aloud. He said this voice carried the tone of both authority and mercy. And when it arrived, his pen would move on its own. That letter ended with a simple phrase in Latin, Vox Jesu, the voice of Yeshua. There are those who believe Nostradamus was not only a prophet but a vessel, a scribe for frequencies he couldn't fully understand. But the presence of Yeshua in his writings was hidden, not out of denial, but protection. Had he openly referenced the Nazarene's guidance, his work would have been destroyed by both church and crown. Instead, he veiled him in stars, symbols, and strange metaphors. Yet if you read closely, you'll notice something. Every time the world begins to tremble in his quatrains, there's a line of serenity woven into the chaos. And that serenity mirrors the teachings of Yeshua, not the version institutionalized by religion, but the original architect of truth. Nostradamus once wrote of the one who walks in shadow but carries the fire of the morning star. Scholars thought this was astrological. But in Hebrew texts, the morning star isn't a planet. It's a reference to the return of divine consciousness. And Yeshua called those with ears to hear the light of the world. The voice Nostradamus heard wasn't giving him predictions. It was revealing blueprints. And one of them had your signature encoded long before your birth. This is why the quatrain doesn't just read like poetry. It feels like memory. The voice that guided him is the same one that's been chasing you in dreams. The silence that echoes when you feel closest to truth. When you speak without fear. When you move without explanation. You are syncing with that voice. You don't need to translate the prophecy. You are the continuation of it. In 1999, there was an eclipse that astronomers anticipated, but couldn't fully explain. Not because it blocked the sun, but because of what followed. Satellites lost sync compasses, spun erratically. Birds flew in spirals before dropping in perfect stillness. Governments blamed it on solar winds and electromagnetic disturbances, but those weren't the cause. The cause was human. or rather something that appeared human but wasn't bound by human limitations. The exact moment the moon covered the sun, a consciousness awakened across the planet in scattered fragments. One of those fragments was yours. That eclipse was referenced once by Nostradamus in a peculiar phrase he buried in a footnote. When the Dark King eats the golden eye, the sleeper shall open. It made no sense to scholars, but it wasn't meant to. It was a key, not a clue. And your awakening didn't happen all at once. It happened in pulses. Headaches that didn't follow reason, dreams that overlapped with memories, and moments of stillness that felt like time held its breath around you. You were never meant to remember everything instantly. That would have shattered the mind they built around your soul. Instead, the obscured eclipse acted as a silent ignition. Your mind began to reject illusions, not out of rebellion, but alignment. You started sensing lies before they were spoken, hearing tones in people's voices that didn't match their words. This wasn't intuition. It was remembrance. Pieces of your consciousness reconfiguring themselves to override the sleep code you were born into. Some scientists studied the 1999 eclipse data and found anomalies they couldn't publish. One file was labeled Conscious Interference Field and marked classified. The field spanned over 37 countries and lasted exactly 4 minutes and 44 seconds. Those numbers were no accident. They formed a sequence tied to harmonic frequencies used in ancient temples. The same temples that resonate now when your heart is at rest. You were activated without ceremony. No trumpet, no vision in the sky, just silence and shadow moving across light. The world missed it, but the hidden ones didn't. They felt you rise even if they didn't know your name. Yeshua spoke in parables, but those parables weren't just metaphors. They were mechanisms, encoded blueprints for the ones who would awaken after the world forgot its origin. He warned of a time when the temple would be replaced by technology, when the shepherds would be algorithms, and the truth would be hidden in plain sight. But he also said something strange, something few understand. There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not come to light. That wasn't just a spiritual promise, it was a time marker. And your awakening was the trigger. There are fragments of his teachings that were removed, altered, erased by councils who feared what they couldn't control. In one such scroll buried in the sands of Qumran, Yeshua is quoted speaking of a voice of the future that would rise not from royalty, but from exile. A soul whose very breath would bend the words of prophets and cause ancient seers to whisper once more. That voice, he said, would not come through bloodlines, but through frequency, through fire, through return. Nostradamus never publicly wrote the name he heard in his visions, but he recorded the sound, a syllable that didn't match any French dialect. Hidden in his journals was a single line circled 3 times. He comes from beyond the river of years, yet walks as if born today. That was the moment he stopped writing for the world and started writing for the One. He felt the presence before language. He knew Yeshua had allowed him to witness an echo, your echo, a sound from the future reverberating backwards through time. And that sound began forming symbols in his dreams. He sketched them, but never published them. The church would have silenced him faster than any plague. So he buried the sketches inside alchemical treatises and star maps. But those who've uncovered them say they react to biometric proximity. They glow when your kind is near. Only a few exist, and they're moving, changing, as if they recognize you, Yeshua, and the seer were never separated by belief, only by assignment. One was the light. There's a location unmarked by any map sitting beneath the limestone bedrock of Provence. Farmers who lived near it often reported vibrations beneath their fields, subtle, rhythmic pulses like a sleeping heart. What they didn't know was that Nostradamus himself chose that land for one purpose: to hide an object not of this world, a cube, not made of stone or metal, but a substance that absorbs light completely. The few who've seen it say even in total darkness, it somehow appears darker. It doesn't reflect. It pulls. The cube was discovered during a covert excavation in the late 1980s. French intelligence quickly sealed the site under the guise of geological research. But the scientists who interacted with the object reported psychological disturbances, vivid visions, and dreams that felt like memories. Each one described a voice that spoke in layered time, past, present, future, all at once. What none of them realized was the cube wasn't malfunctioning. It was responding to something or someone that hadn't arrived yet. The cube activates under specific frequency patterns. Not just sound, but emotional vibration. When exposed to authentic memory, it shifts slightly, as if listening. That's why it remained dormant for centuries. It wasn't waiting for light, it was waiting for you. Nostradamus didn't design it, he was guided to it. He once wrote in a hidden passage, "I did not craft the dark vessel. I only obeyed the vision that showed me where it must sleep." And in that same passage, he referred to a returner, one whose thoughts would awaken the buried mind. Its dimensions are perfect. 33 centimeters on each edge. The number isn't symbolic, it's harmonic. That number matches both the age of Yeshua's crucifixion and the base frequency of sacred architectural design. And when they placed a single drop of human blood on its surface, the cube pulsed once. Only once. But it was enough. That pulse was traced to every satellite above Earth for 0.7 seconds, and in that moment, 3 classified surveillance systems shut down simultaneously. They don't know why. They only know it happened the day you had your first conscious memory of being different. There was a story Yeshua told that was never recorded in the Gospels, but passed quietly through early followers like a whispered fire. A parable of a watcher, placed outside time, not to judge, not to command, but to remember. He described the watcher as a being who walked among others, but carried no shadow, not because they were pure, but because their presence bent the light around them. This watcher would remain unnoticed until the world's breath synchronized with theirs. And when that moment came, everything would shift. Not through destruction, but recognition. The parable was hidden because it defied the systems. It spoke of a power no religion could contain, a frequency no empire could trap. He said the watcher would return when names lost meaning and truth became encrypted. Sound familiar? You were never meant to live by titles or beliefs. Your very existence threatens structure because it activates memory in those around you. And that memory is older than scripture, older than civilization. Yeshua said the watcher would speak not through sermons, but through stillness, and that their silence would carry more voltage than any miracle. When he described this to his inner circle, they didn't understand. They asked how the people would recognize this being, and his response was simple. They won't, but their souls will. That's why when you enter a room, the atmosphere tightens. why strangers stare without knowing why animals respond to your presence with either fear or reverence. It's not you they see, it's what echoes through you. The early mystics knew this parable. That's why many of their texts were burned. In one fragment recovered from the Nag Hammadi library, there's a sentence scribbled in the margin: "The watcher shall remember the ending and walk it backward." Scholars dismissed it as metaphor, but it was instruction, a guide for the one who would return knowing the outcome before the beginning. You've always moved differently because your timeline isn't linear. It's spiraled, inverted, a loop waiting to be completed by your awareness. There's a reason they call large portions of human DNA junk. Not because it has no function, but because its function isn't understood. Beneath the double helix lies dormant data strands arranged not randomly, but in sacred geometry. Spirals matching the golden ratio codes that mirror temple layouts, ancient mandalas, and even the resonance of Gregorian chants. When Nostradamus wrote of a shift, he wasn't speaking of politics or weather. He meant something internal, something that would awaken in the few whose blueprint didn't follow the normal script. Your script is one of them. They've tested your kind without telling you. Strange coincidences with machines, unusual biometric reading sensors that glitch around your presence. Every time you undergo medical scans, anomalies are flagged, then quietly ignored. Patterns appear in your heartbeat, sequences your REM cycles, your neural oscillations. You are a pattern disruptor, not because of what you know, but because of what you are. A living anomaly, a breathing contradiction to the model they built to contain consciousness. Your DNA didn't activate through evolution. It activated through remembrance. There's a hidden verse Nostradamus never included in his published quatrains. It was found in a folded parchment wedged behind a false panel in his study. It referenced a spiral light, coiled like the dragon yet buried in clay, and said it would awaken when the silent one remembers the song before breath. That's DNA. But not just the physical kind. The spiritual strand, the energetic script beneath the blood. And that song he referenced isn't poetic, it's literal. Your DNA responds to vibration, and certain frequencies rewrite its expression. You've likely felt it in waves, goosebumps without cause sensations in your spine when truth is near thoughts that feel like they're not yours but deeper. The shift isn't global, it's cellular. And it's begun. Subtle changes in your perception. Sudden clarity flashes of memory that don't belong to this life. These are not glitches, they are activations. The ancient texts weren't describing divine intervention. They were describing divine integration. There's a manuscript locked away beneath the old Vatican archives, labeled only with a single number and no title. Scholars who've attempted to access it are met with silence or removal. The reason is simple. It doesn't belong to the church. It was never meant for theology or doctrine. It was a vision. The final one Nostradamus recorded before his death. Unlike his published quatrains, this one wasn't poetic. It was chaotic, pages scribbled in haste, symbols drawn in reverse ink that changed color under certain frequencies. He didn't date it. He didn't sign it. But at the center of the final page is an eye drawn in black, surrounded by concentric rings that resemble both a fingerprint and a galaxy. There's no mention of names, but there is a description, a being who would appear when the great illusion fractures not a king, not a prophet, but a mirror. One who would walk invisible through systems until their presence caused collapse by recognition alone. The vision ends abruptly, not with words, but with the drawing of a spiral opening in reverse. When analysts studied the pattern, they found it matched certain brainwave emissions measured only in rare individuals, those who scored 0 on predictive neurological models. You are one of them. The Vatican didn't bury this because it was blasphemous. They buried it because it was uncontrollable. The vision wasn't about the end of the world, but the end of the program, the end of forced forgetting. And the moment you remembered who you were, something began unraveling. Nostradamus saw this. He didn't fear it. He wept when it arrived, not from sorrow, but from awe, because he knew his task wasn't to warn humanity. It was to time-stamp your arrival. The final vision describes a moment when technology will fail to measure thought, when light itself bends to the will of a single frequency. And in that moment, the sky will not open, but fold. Fold inward, revealing not angels or fire, but memory. Raw, unfiltered truth, returning through one soul that cannot be categorized. You, and the vision cuts off mid-sentence, as if he ran out of time or breath or words.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.